This weekend, the New York Times revealed another meeting at Trump Tower in which representatives of foreign governments apparently offered to help the Trump presidential campaign. The Times reports that Blackwater founder Eric Prince arranged the meeting on August 3rd, 2016, with Donald Trump Jr., George Nader, who is an emissary for two wealthy Arab princes, and Joel Zamel, who is an Israeli social media specialist. According to the Times, quote, Nader told Donald Trump Jr. that the princes who led Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were eager to help his father win election as president. The social media specialist, Joel Zamel, extolled his company's ability to give an edge to a political campaign. By that time, his firm had already drawn up a multi-million-dollar proposal for a social media manipulation effort to help elect Mr. Trump. The Times says Donald Trump Jr. responded approvingly, according to a person with knowledge of the meeting. The Times adds, quote, after Mr. Trump was elected, Mr. Nader paid Mr. Zamel a large sum of money described by one associate as up to $2 million. Donald Trump Jr.'s attorney released this statement on the meeting. Prior to the 2016 election, Donald Trump Jr. recalls a meeting with Eric Prince, George Nader, and another individual who may be Joel Zamel. They pitched Mr. Trump Jr. on a social media platform or marketing strategy. He was not interested, and that was the end of it. Eric Prince's role in arranging the meeting contradicts his under oath testimony to the House Intelligence Committee in a way that sure looks like perjury. According to the transcript of that under oath testimony, Eric Prince had this exchange with Congressman Tom Rooney. Mr. Rooney, okay, so aside from writing these papers, donating, supporting in a, Mr. Prince, yard sign in my yard, Mr. Rooney, yeah. So there was no other formal communications or contact with the campaign. Mr. Prince, correct. Joining us now, Brian Klaas, fellow in global politics at the London School of Economics, and the co-author of the new book, How to Rig an Election, to be published tomorrow. And David Frum is back with us. And Brian, your reading of this new report of the meeting in Trump Tower.
Well, it's a pattern of disqualifying behavior and unconvincing denials from the Trump camp. It speaks to their willingness to at least attempt to collude with foreign actors in the election. And I also think it talks to the fact that they are actually willing to use business interests with groups like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to potentially influence foreign policy. Remember last June that Trump attacked Qatar on Twitter, for example, which is a rival of both the Saudis and the Emirates. And now we have to wonder, is it because of this behavior? Is it because of these meetings? And so I think what's clear is that there's this pattern of willing to collude. Whether or not they succeeded, right, they certainly tried. And I think that's something that is disqualifying, even if it is not illegal.
David Frum, there's so much to talk about here, but the one point that jumps out at me is just the casual ease with which Eric Prince perjures himself in testifying about his interactions with the campaign, saying nothing other than the lawn sign and contributing to something. And here he is, right in that meeting, Donald Trump Jr. confirming today through his lawyer that Eric Prince was in that meeting.
Well, that is astonishing. And here are a couple of other things that leap out at me from the story. The first is, notice the disparaging way that UAE and Saudi talk about Jared Kushner. Notice how Jared Kushner is doing business shortly thereafter with Qatar. It looks like what's going on here is a bidding war in which Qatar is placing its chips on Jared Kushner, and Saudi Arabia and UAE are trying to buy their way into Don Jr. And it's not that the campaign is for sale; it's a kind of auction with different countries buying different properties on the Trump monopoly board. I think Jared Kushner probably comes at a higher price than Don Jr. The other thing that is sort of striking is a name you didn't mention. That is Elliot Broidy, who was a business partner of George Nader. And many people remember him because he's the man who, although he usually hires very sophisticated lawyers, hired Michael Cohen to deliver funds to a woman with whom Elliot Broidy said he had an affair and had a baby who was then aborted by the woman. And the very next day, after the first of those payments issued, Elliot Broidy got a White House meeting with President Trump in December of 2017. There are a lot of suggestive pieces here in this puzzle. I think this is a meeting that's going to reward a lot of rich study in the days ahead.
Let's listen to what Congressman Adam Schiff said about it.
If these facts are accurate, it demonstrates yet again just how not only willing but eager the president's son and the Trump campaign were to solicit to receive foreign help. Receiving, soliciting, using foreign assistance is a crime. You're not allowed to get the help of a foreign government, friendly or unfriendly.
And Brian, it's not at all clear what Donald Trump Jr. knew about the legalities of this.
Yeah, but that's not an excuse for a major presidential campaign. And I think one of the things, if we zoom out from this story, if you think about the drip, drip, drip of these stories of foreign influence in the election, if they all dropped at one time, we would have been shocked. We would have realized that this campaign had engaged in disqualifying behavior that meant they should be nowhere near America's national security, nowhere near America's secrets, nowhere near the integrity of our elections. And yet, because it's sort of every few months a new story comes out, the Trump Tower meeting of July, the Trump Tower meeting of August, these things are building a pattern that should really shock us. And I think, unfortunately, we're becoming numb to this pattern of disqualifying behavior. And every single time they deny it. And then there's more reporting, and it becomes clear that they're lying. And then eventually they acknowledge it, and again, the goalposts move. And so I think we need to be aware that this is not acceptable for anyone who is trying to become the president of the United States to behave like this, or for their family members to behave like this in the run-up to a presidential election.
Congressman Eric Swalwell said that what worries him about this is it seems that the word got out to more than one country about the vulnerability of the Trump campaign. Let's listen to that.
What is so unusual are the number of foreign nationals who were reaching out to the Trump campaign. I think part of what was going on here is that the candidate himself was inviting Russia to attack, and other countries started to see, well, this guy, he's open to doing business with anyone. He's transactional. He's gullible. So maybe we can get our interests before him. And so he is almost inviting them to come and make these different approaches.
David Frum, your reaction to that?
Well, Rudy Giuliani said, well, what about the rest of the world? Well, the rest of the world, I think, has stories, too. There's stories about Japan making special favors to Ivanka Trump during the transition. And China, of course, was sought out in the transition as an investor in Jared Kushner's Dune building on Fifth Avenue.
David Frum, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.